Hello everyone and welcome to another project with Frocks and Frolics. Today we're going to sew a little girl's bag called Mary Lou bag. There are 5 different ways to put the bag together. 2 of them include zip insertions and 3 of them don't. So in order to find the right bag for you, I would suggest that you watch the introductory video, and the link to that can be found at the end of this video. This beginner's bag introduces you to a few techniques that will make your bag really stand out, like this lovely applique, contrast lining, using purse feet and putting a base into your bag, laminating handles. It's all those little touches which will make your bag look really professional. And finally, I've even put a little bow on the front, which I think is very cute. So let's get started with a Mary Lou bag. You will need some iron-on vinyl. A firmer one probably is better than a soft one. Flexible board, vinyl to iron on to your shell fabric, the shell fabric, some lining, and I've used a really soft cotton, 4 purse feet, magnetic fastening, and that comes in different sizes, so see what you can get at the shop, and your matching yarn. First of all, I would check that you actually printed off your pattern the right scale. That should measure 1 inch. The lower part of the bag has got little arrows which show you where you need to snip. This is where your handles are going to go. You need the lower part and the upper part of the bag twice, the lining twice, and again twice in your volume fleece. For the flap closure, you want to cut the lining and the shell fabric, and then with a separate pattern, which is especially for the flap, you want to cut the volume fleece, and finally a piece of vinyl which is going to be ironed to the outside flap, the shell fabric flap. If you want to, you can do the heart. I left them off in the end, but you can do, so cut a bit of fabric. The handles come twice in the shell fabric and twice in the vinyl. Then you have your bag base with the holes, the purse feet, your magnetic fastener, matching yarn, and you won't need this pattern piece. That's only when you put a zip in. Let's begin with the handles. Remove the vinyl from the paper and stick it with the sticky side down onto the upper fabric. Put the paper back down. You have that checkered side facing up and the smooth side down, and then you iron for 8 seconds right across the fabric until it's really joined to the fabric, like this. Iron it over to the middle. Don't forget to put a cloth or something over it, otherwise it'll stick to your iron. Then fold them in again, pin, and if you're using fabric, obviously you can pin it all. If you're using laminated, you might want to use clips. Stitch along the side all the way around, large stitch length, so 3.5, and then find a really good fixed point. Don't let the fabric push. That's what it wants to do, but you need to keep it nice and smooth. Now you can iron them again and then almost heat set them to the shape that you want them to be. Now we're going to cut out some letters, Mary Lou, and I'm going to put this straight onto the outside of my flap, and then I'm going to iron the vinyl over the top of that. It's dead simple. I've also ironed on my volume fleece to the wrong side of the fabric. That's the inside of the flap, and I'm now going to put my fastening on there. So take your pattern piece, the little squares cut out, and if you put your fastening right in the center of that, you are in the perfect position for it. You might want to mark where the little arms go to, because they'll be different depending on how big your popper is. Then you want to snip this, tiny little snips, not too big. Don't want this to rip out, just so the little arms can fit through. From the outside, push them through. Put the little plate on top. Push the arms apart. And that's the top part of it. And the other part I would keep safe. I am very good at losing these sort of things, so keep them safe. We could now actually just go right sides together, but I've decided to top stitch all this with my triple stitch, which I really love. It looks very structural. It's like an embroidery stitch. I think it's really lovely. I've used a variety of colors to go around my letters. And if you have overlapping letters, you just need to be careful where you start. You want to start at the upper part of where the overlap starts and then go all the way around. So if you do that, then you can go all the way around and it really looks like the letters lie on top of each other, which I think is a really, really nice effect. Now I can put right sides together and sew all the way around the flap. You can use the fleece as your guide for that, or you can just go by the centimeter like I'm doing here. It really doesn't matter too much which way around you do it, whatever you feel comfortable with. If you have a look at where I'm lining it up with, it's actually where the opening is, where the needle is. If you go straight across, that's the bit that I line up. Now we want to cut back the seam allowances. 3 to 4 millimeter is plenty. Turn the wallet inside out. And then give it another good press, work all the edges out so that we can top stitch this really neatly. And I'm using my triple stitch again all the way around. The triple stitch will cause the fabric to push out of the machine. You can see that here, and I'm holding against it with quite a lot of force. It doesn't matter how good your sewing machine is, you haven't got anything under the right side of your presser foot, have you? And so the left side here has got all this fabric, so naturally it wants to veer off from under the presser foot and run off the fabric, so you need to really hold that in place. It's a bit easier actually when you go around the curve because there is more of the fabric underneath the actual presser foot. Now we want to cut the fleece in half, simply because this time we want to do lots of top stitching and this is just easier. Make sure that you cut it back so that you've got seam allowance all the way around, and you do the same on the lower part of the bag. Cut it back a bit so you don't have lots of fleece stuck in your seam allowances. This doesn't have to be totally accurate. When you see me sewing this up, you will see that I wasn't that accurate either. It doesn't matter, it's just so it's not so thick. Really steam this on with lots of steam, and then we can put on our handles. Now, I actually had this really bright idea to not put them on the lower part of the bag, but thought maybe it's easier to put them on the top. Don't do that. Do it like this, like you see me do there. Pin them to the lower half, not the top half. But you live and you learn. I do try new things, and then I'm thinking, oh no, now I have filmed this and I didn't want to film another bag exactly the same just for this. So attach it to the lower part, but the system is exactly the same, of course, and I've shown it in 4 other videos, so really if you want to see that, then just go to another video. So this needs to be put where the snips are and just stitched into place on the front and the back of the bag. Now we're going to close the side seams, 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then we have the top part of the bag together. Make sure that you don't run off there, but you actually go straight down like you can see me do here. That makes it easier to sew it together later on. Now we're going to mark the place where we want to put our purse feet, and in order to do that you want to mark 1 centimeter on the base of your pattern and draw a line across. Do the same on the other side, and now we know where the seam allowance is. We can overlap those two and we can mark where the purse feet will go when the bag is finished. So put these lines on top of each other exactly and pin. If you don't do this, I've seen people mark this wrong, so this alleviates any chance of making a mistake. Take your base, place it central to your opening and mark through with a pencil. Now we can forget about this, take the pins back out and work the bag. We're going to close the side seam on the lower part of the bag as well. Again, don't sort of have a pointy ending. Go with what's on the pattern, which is to go along the seam and then it's almost straightening out at the end. Then you want to iron both those seams apart, and then we can start top stitching this. And again, you need a really good stitch length, 3.5, and we go down either side, and that makes the bag look more professional. It's really nice. So you can see here why I thought this would be easier if it was on the top, but actually, you know, it's an afterthought that you might want to take into consideration of putting the flap and the handles on once the top stitching has been done. It's not quite as easy, but as long as you've got the snips in the right place, really what can go wrong? You just put the stuff on. So you decide how you want to work this. Let me know what your decision was. Have you worked it like this? Have you changed that part of my instruction? How did you get on with it? Would love to hear from you. So we turn it round, we go all the way back. You can see the nice large stitch here. So if you look at your jeans, for example, they also have large stitches. Small stitches always make things look really homemade. Straighten out. Now we can turn the bag inside out, the lower bag, and we flop it over onto the top bag, and now we can just slide the top part of the bag in there, and we pin first the seams together. So on either side we put a pin first so that we know, okay, this is in the correct position. Go over to the other side, do that one, and that's in the correct position, and then we do the center and so on and so forth. We pin it all the way around. Now we can just stick this onto the arm of the sewing machine. So you have to lift the plate of the sewing machine off, and then you have got the arm there, and you may have to really stretch the fabric to fit on top of each other, even now they're exactly the same size. Now when you move this out, it's like a little skirt almost, and we are going to top stitch that line now. So move the seam allowance down, push it back on your machine and stitch along that line. Always really push the fabric apart so you get a really good clean line. If you want to do a heart as well and applique that to the front of your bag, you need to place right sides together, put the paper over the top, stitch around the paper, then cut it back, snip a hole in the back, turn it, iron it, and then attach it to your bag. And there is a very slow and very detailed instructions video on the project page for that as well. I decided to leave that off. Just make sure that you have it above the base so that it doesn't get swallowed up by the base later. Now we're going to make the lining. Put the right sides together and close your side seams. Leave the lower part open. Centimeter seam allowance. First line on your sewing machine, that should be. If you're working in inches, it's 1/8 of an inch or something, but it will be marked on your sewing machine. They're all the same. Now I can just stick that lining in there, right sides facing each other. That's really important. When you're working with a zip, it would not be like that. Pin all the way around, and then we can sew this on. You will find that the inside is slightly smaller than the outside of the bag, and that's so that it sits a lot better when it's finished. So you will have to stretch it on a little bit while you're sewing. Now we're going to top stitch it, so place it back under the sewing machine and top stitch all the way around. This will give you a fantastic edge, and because it's all open, it's really not hard to do, and it's such a good technique to learn, especially for a beginner. Understitching makes everything look really crisp and clean. So really push the fabrics apart, and there you can see the understitching. Now all I have to do is turn it in, and it automatically wants to turn in just right, and I can just top stitch it now all the way around again, foot width. So now all we need to do is put the lower part of the popper on, and it's up to you whether you want to have it lower or slightly higher depending on where you want it to sit. Some people like it better a little bit open at the top, other people might like it lower down. The important part is that it's central to the two handles. Just draw 2 pencil lines where you want your magnetic fastener to go, and then you need to do 2 snips there, but be very careful that you don't catch your lining. So fold the outer part of the shell over and then insert 2 tiny little snips here in this area, through which we can then push our magnetic fastener. You want to put the plate on the other side again, and then push the arms apart, and you've got your snap fastening, insert it. All we have to do now is close the bag. Now we want to just quickly push some holes through the marked area that we've done with a pencil earlier. So this is where our purse feet are going to go. Do that on all four corners and then turn the bag inside out. Close the base seam and then we're going to do the little corners here. And again, we do that on the lining as well, but this time we leave an opening gap which is just big enough so your hand fits through that. So you want to go backwards and forwards so none of it can come apart. Then you open out the end. That means the base seam has to lie on top of the side seam and sew straight across. Same on your shell fabric. This time you can use that pencil line you've drawn earlier, so you ensure that when you put your base in, actually the holes are in the correct position. Make sure everything is edge to edge. Secure your stitching, and there you go. Iron the seam apart like that, just open it out a bit and then press it, and now put the seams on top of each other, creating this fish mouth. Needs to be really nice and straight like that, and stitch all the way across on both sides, of course, and stitch across the same way I did on the lining. You can see it here done already, and my gap. Now that my bag is completed and I've got the lovely base on it, you want to turn it inside out. Basically finished, isn't it? Apart from the base. It's now going in, so you want to fiddle through your purse feet, then you can put your base in, and the purse feet have to go through the holes that you've put into your base, and then you just force them apart. And I'm not using my nails for that. Use a scissor, because that is just a recipe for disaster, isn't it? Force them apart. And that's your purse feet. Finally, we just do up the edge here from our lining. That was our turning gap. So we stitch as close as we can. And I've done something really novel here. I have actually changed the thread to the correct color. It's red. Yes. So very close to the edge, so it's nice and neat. Tuck it all in, basically job done. But of course I decided to put a little bow on, and if you haven't got enough to make a bigger bow, you can just take 2 pieces of fabric right sides together and then sew a rectangle and just sew all the way around. And then depending on which side you're going to gather, you want to put like a little crease in, and then do a little snip through the back and turn it. You can of course do the proper bow as well. There's a video on the project page for that, but this is like a really quick option if you haven't got enough fabric, or you want to use 2 different fabrics for the top and the lower part. So I've given that an iron, and then all I have to do is gather it through the middle, and it won't come apart. That little snip will not be visible at all. So I've decided to go up the tall way to get as much gather as possible. So you just run your needle through there. I've got double thread actually with a knot at the end, and I wrap that round, and voila, my bow is already finished. And because I'm doing this in New York and I don't have all my ribbons here, I'm using a ribbon that I have got in my toolbox, and it's too big, so I had to fold it in half, so it's not as accurate as I would like it. So this was the Mary Lou bag. There are 5 instructional videos for this bag and 1 introductory video, which I would watch first because I tell you all about iron-on vinyl and the iron-on volume fleece, etc. And of course you can check out the project page, which has all the links to the materials you need for this bag, and of course also to the pattern. Thank you very much for watching. Bye!